His security arrangement hasn't shifted, not a syllable of it. Not a single clause, not one condition, not one comma of the agreement Prince Harry hauled through the British court system and walked away from empty-handed. And yet, his wife and children are reportedly packing bags for a flight to the United Kingdom next month. The same nation he spent half a decade branding as too perilous to expose them to. Sit with that contradiction, because by the time this video ends, I'm going to tell you precisely what I believe it signals. And it's nowhere near the tale the headlines are peddling. I owe you that payoff. Stick with me to the finish and you'll have it. Let me paint the picture the way someone on the inside sees it, not the way a polished press statement wants you to see it. For half a decade, the drumbeat rolling out of California was constant, and it was straightforward. Britain is unsafe. Britain is hostile. Britain is unlivable for our family unless we're granted the protection we insist upon. That was the message. That was the brand. Too risky. Too exposed, too heartless a country to ever bring the children home to. Prince Harry said the words. Meghan, by many accounts, drew that line and refused to step across it. Now here's where nearly everyone stumbles. While that narrative was being hammered out on repeat, the actual security machinery stayed put, exactly where it had always been. Handled case by case, reviewed ahead of time, bound by conditions. The same apparatus that governed before governs today. So, what genuinely shifted? Either Britain really was too dangerous back then, in which case a spare bedroom and a guest suite couldn't possibly patch that over. Or, Prince Harry has quietly figured out that being severed entirely from Britain is bleeding his brand pale, draining his credibility, erasing his children's royal inheritance, weakening his footing in a story he no longer directs. I lean heavily toward that second explanation. Let me walk you through why. Before I push forward, let me anchor you in the timeline, because the timeline is where this whole thing either coheres or collapses. Step 1. The couple withdraw from royal duties and relocate abroad. Step 2. The automatic taxpayer-funded security that came bundled with working royal status is adjusted. Step 3. Prince Harry takes that adjustment to court. Step 4. He loses. Step 5. He appeals, and in the spring of 2025, he loses again. Step 6. This week, headlines detonate claiming a royal residence, an olive branch, protection secured. Hold those 6 beats in your mind, because the chasm between Step 5 and Step 6 is the whole riddle. Now, let me lay out the stakes plainly, because this isn't a minor story dressed up as a major one. Consider what actually hangs on the answer. For the children, it's their entire tie to a royal identity, a lineage, a place carved into a centuries-old bloodline. For Prince Harry, it's his reputation, his credibility, and whether the version of events he's been narrating publicly for 5 years survives a collision with the public record. For Meghan, it's the relevance of a lifestyle brand that breathes and starves on attention alone. And for the institution itself, it's a matter of precedent, of whether the rules bend the instant enough headlines lean on them. Every one of those stakes is balanced on one contradiction. He said it was too dangerous. Now the plane is reportedly boarding. Both statements can't hold as full truths. Let me read you the sort of headlines that flooded feeds this week. The King extends Prince Harry a royal residence. Protection secured. The olive branch finally offered. Read those alone and you'd picture a palace flinging its gates wide, every old wound stitched neat, the prodigal welcomed home to trumpets. Now scan what sat directly under those exact headlines that same week. A second stream of reporting said something starkly different. No additional security was being granted, because that call was never King Charles's to make in the first place. So one batch of coverage tells you he's got his protection restored. Another batch tells you not a thing has budged. Those two accounts cannot both stand. They are oil and water. So which one actually survives scrutiny? Here's where the coverage grows slippery, and you deserve the honest read. This isn't a victory. This isn't some sweeping reversal of a clear, decisive legal loss. What appears to have happened, based on what's publicly visible, is a fresh security assessment carried out for the first time in roughly 5 years. A review, not a rescue. And here's the version getting far less airtime, the one that holds up under a second glance. Prince Harry's protection seems to sit precisely where it always sat, case by case, hemmed in by conditions. He reportedly still has to give weeks of advance notice before he even touches down, with each visit weighed by a committee drawing in police, the Home Office, the Cabinet Office, and the royal household itself. There's still no automatic protection. There's still no convoy of flashing lights whisking him through the Capitol the way his brother, Prince William, moves through it. He isn't going to be blue lit through anywhere. He isn't going to be handed some VIP treatment the instant he steps onto the tarmac, just because his father wears the crown. Picture the arrival. He lands. He's met quietly, no fanfare, and he's taken to wherever he's staying under the same sort of arrangement reportedly available to other non-working members of the family. That isn't the choreography of a man who's just unlocked some glossy new tier of protection. That's the same setup that already existed, wrapped in warmer language and resold to you as a triumph, which drags us straight into the question the cheerful headlines keep dancing around. If the security genuinely hasn't budged, and Britain was supposedly far too dangerous for his family, then why is that family suddenly buckling their seatbelts and flying in right now? Keep that question lit up in your mind. We circle back to it at the very end, and I'll warn you now, the answer I settle on isn't the one trending across your timeline, and it may quietly reshape the way you view this entire saga. Step back and take in the shape of it from the outside. What you're watching, and this is the genuinely fascinating part, is a couple in California with a powerful hunger. A hunger for relevance. A hunger for the oxygen of attention. Because attention is the foundation everything else has been built upon. Publicity is the engine, and every few months that engine demands fuel. Before we feed it, let's settle the single biggest thing the reports keep flubbing. Who actually holds the power here? Regardless of what 100 headlines imply, that power has never rested with King Charles. And before we get to who does hold it, there's a second hard truth that makes the whole "he's been given it back" fairy tale nearly impossible to defend. This already ran through the courts. The legal fight failed. That isn't chatter. That isn't my opinion wearing the costume of fact. That's the public record, written down, ruled on, sealed. Prince Harry directly challenged the British government's decision on this exact security question, including the alterations to his automatic taxpayer-funded protection. The case was heard. The court ruled against him. He appealed. He lost the appeal in the spring of 2025, and that defeat left him with no further legal move on the table, no additional rounds. He cannot sue over this again. The courtroom door is bolted shut. He was chasing exactly the sort of protection some of this week's headlines now whisper has somehow been reinstated. He carried it through the full legal process, hoping for a different outcome. The court refused it. That's why these newest claims raise so many eyebrows. Plenty of you remember the case. This was the appeal judgment. The judge reportedly walked through every single visit Prince Harry had made to the United Kingdom, alone or accompanied, and named who traveled with him each time. Every visit logged. So sit with what that means for this week's noise. If the court dismissed his challenge and the government's position held its ground, then no public decision has emerged since to overturn that outcome. No fresh ruling, no headline-worthy policy shift that silently rewrote the arrangement. As it stands, on the record, that earlier decision remains the one in effect. From where I'm sitting, this whole business only underlines a single point. The relevant body and the Home Office were never running some biased vendetta against him. Quite the opposite. It proves him wrong. It demonstrates that all that time, all that expense, all those petty, small, self-absorbed legal skirmishes bought him nothing but an invoice and a verdict. So when a headline this week tells you Prince Harry has secured protection or won his family's safety, you're perfectly entitled to pause and ask, hang on, isn't that the precise opposite of what happened inside that courtroom? Because these claims don't square with the public record. The court said one thing, the headlines are humming another, and that gap is exactly where all the argument lives. Once you recall how the case actually wrapped up, those victory-flavored headlines start to look less like a confirmed shift and a whole lot more like an interpretation stretched well beyond the known facts. Now, here's my honest read, flagged plainly as my read and nothing more. The institution has watched this exact choreography unfold before, and it has a rhythm you could almost set a metronome to. First arrives the emotional language, then arrives the carefully staged image, then arrive the headlines, then arrive the interviews, the books, the documentaries, the claims about what supposedly transpired behind closed doors. Once you've seen the pattern play out a few times, you can hear the next beat coming before it lands. If the courts didn't shift the arrangement, and King Charles doesn't even hold the authority to shift it, which I'll unpack in a moment, then the idea that everything has suddenly been thrown wide open deserves far harder scrutiny. Here's the detail buried under all the noise about the king. King Charles cannot personally hand his son a state-funded security detail because that choice simply isn't his to make. Those calls travel through the government, with the Home Office and the relevant committee weighing threat levels, weighing cost, weighing the specific shape of each visit. So when a headline murmurs that the king is footing the bill for Prince Harry's protection, or that he personally arranged some new detail, you have to peel that claim away from how the process is actually understood to function. On the record, those decisions get made through the established government system, not by the monarch alone with a flick of his hand. The security tier is set. It isn't being quietly financed behind a curtain. The Home Office has not extended any fresh privileges to the man once styled the Duke of Sussex. He knows that. But rather like the time he claimed he had personally handed a hefty sum to a well-known children's charity telethon, he can be remarkably slippery about laying out the precise, some might say true, version of events. Here's what King Charles can genuinely offer: a place to stay, a chance at a family reunion, an opportunity to spend time with his grandchildren after years of distance. All of that sits squarely inside his personal gift. What he cannot personally hand over is the state-funded security his son fought for in court and walked away from empty-handed. That's why the framing matters so enormously. If the public comes away believing King Charles simply rewrote the security arrangement himself, the pressure and the blame drift toward the king, even though the public reporting points to government machinery, not the monarch, as the place where these calls get made. And it's worth saying plainly, the threat Prince Harry and his family allegedly face is nowhere near as severe or as constant as the threat surrounding the working royals. King Charles, the reigning monarch, Prince William, the heir's wife and children, the direct line of succession. For reasons that ought to be blindingly obvious, those are the people the serious standing protection is engineered around. The framework was already in place before this announcement dropped. Based on everything public, it remains unchanged now. Offering someone a bed for a few nights doesn't magically rewrite a committee's risk assessment or the procedures that committee follows because of how the calculation actually works. Is there a threat? That's the question. And on the public evidence, there has never been a demonstrated threat to Meghan or the children beyond the lenses of the paparazzi, which, let's be honest, is precisely the sort of attention the brand courts every single day of the week. Which pulls us to something easy to miss until you slow down and actually examine it. The offer of a royal residence has been dressed up by some as a colossal, jaw-dropping gesture. So let me ask the unglamorous question. What does that offer actually amount to in practical terms? In plain reality, a royal residence is a place to stay. There's no public indication that a family visit would involve paying rent for a handful of nights. Most people expect a parent to offer a spare room without slapping an invoice on it. It would be genuinely bizarre if it were any other way. So when you see the accommodation described as some extraordinarily generous handout, look straight past the wording and fix your gaze on the practical truth. At its core, it's a roof. Nothing grander, nothing smaller. It's going to be cheaper for the couple to stay on a royal estate because there's no charge attached. It's a home from home. And I couldn't for a second imagine King Charles wanting to bill his younger son for a few nights beneath a family roof. That truly would be odd, wouldn't it? This is exactly why, as I've told you before, Prince Harry and Meghan were so desperate to keep Frogmore Cottage as a base they could slip in and out of without asking anyone, popping up whenever the mood struck them, wandering the grounds of the Windsor estate. All that easy, unsupervised access. A bed on a secure royal estate isn't necessarily some vast new expense for the crown, but it could be a very real, practical benefit for Prince Harry. Staying there could quietly shrink some of the costs that come with arranging private accommodation and the additional security that tends to cling to it. Let's keep it real. They're hurting financially too. We all know it. And here's another thread that keeps slipping under the radar. Reports have claimed that on past visits, Prince Harry declined staying at Buckingham Palace, not out of pride, but because he felt that high-profile, instantly recognizable location was too public and too predictable from a security standpoint. This time, the conversation has reportedly circled around St. James's Palace, or another secure royal residence instead. But notice what is conspicuously missing from the conversation. Not Windsor, not Frogmore Cottage, not Highgrove. Whether that absence carries meaning has become yet another thread of speculation woven around this story. The sheer specialness of this family, the castles, the grounds, the jewels, the centuries of history, all of it only grows more magnetic with time. And put yourself for a moment in the shoes of a child who grows up and only learns years later just how extraordinary their inheritance could have been. That thought carries weight. That one absent detail says a great deal, and it yanks us straight back to a genuine turning point in the whole story. Frogmore Cottage was the Windsor home where the couple could once come and go far more freely. Having it meant a familiar address, easier access, a real sense of independence on the royal estate. But the wider question of how you balance an official royal role against a more independent life became the fracture line. Queen Elizabeth made it unmistakably clear. A permanent half-in, half-out arrangement was never going to feature in the long-term plan. And today, Frogmore Cottage is no longer theirs to use. That part of the story has very clearly shifted. That's the whole heart of it. They wanted to be treated as royal, and that was the precise thing they were told they couldn't have on their own terms. You can't be inside and outside at once. Choose. So if the relevant body decided to hand them full standing protection now, I think that would be a serious mistake. Compare what's reportedly on the table today with what existed before, and the picture looks utterly different. Frogmore Cottage is gone from the equation. The demand for automatic taxpayer-funded security was tested in court and failed. And instead of a private royal residence to use at will, the reported option is a guest suite at a secure property for a limited stay tied to a specific visit and a specific event. That's a profoundly different arrangement from the one that came before. The words passed to a source were these: "We cannot say too much, but Meghan was incapable of fitting in with anyone because she could not cope with following simple rules, since she felt her own way was always better." That doesn't read like a family flinging every door wide open. It reads like a carefully managed approach with firm boundaries drawn around exactly what is on offer and exactly how far any renewed contact is meant to travel. Prince Harry must not expect some half-in, half-out relationship. From the family's point of view, that simply cannot be allowed to take root, because it sets a precedent, and frankly, it makes the rest of the institution look faintly needy and desperate to please. Let me lay this out as a plain scorecard side by side, because once you see it in columns, the spin evaporates. Before, there was Frogmore Cottage, a private Windsor base to come and go from at will. Now, there is a guest suite somewhere like St. James's Palace, offered for a fixed stay tied to a single event. Before, the demand was automatic standing taxpayer-funded protection. Now, after a failed court case and a failed appeal, it is the same case-by-case review that was always there. Before, the arrival could have meant the kind of motorcade his brother receives. Now, it means landing quietly and being taken to wherever he is staying with no flashing lights at all. Before, the framing was a family at war with an institution. Now the framing is a warm olive branch. Look down that scorecard. The framing is the only column that actually changed. Every practical line stayed exactly where it was. You don't hand someone unrestricted run of an estate when the whole arrangement is being kept this tightly defined. The reported picture is far more limited. A room, a fixed window for the visit, a departure once it's over. For anyone who believes the institution has finally drawn firm lines, this is one way those lines could be read in practice. Not a sweeping, tearful reunion. A measured, managed visit with clearly marked expectations. And that leads us straight into the next big question. If this visit is meant to be so controlled and so low-key, then why on earth was it unveiled so loudly with so much fanfare in the first place? That, for me, is the truly fascinating part. The constant manipulation of the press, the endless drip, drip, drip of "we must be recognized, we want to be written about," set right beside the parallel cry of "but don't you dare invade our privacy." The two demands cannot coexist honestly, and so they become the victims of their own contradiction. That's what makes this so compelling to watch. And here's an unexpected angle I want you to sit with, because it reframes the whole publicity question. There's a well-known idea in psychology that for some people, any attention beats no attention. That a spotlight, even a hostile one, even a booing crowd, still confirms that you matter, that you are seen, that you exist in the public mind. Now hold that idea up against a couple whose entire commercial value is measured in how often the world says their names. Suddenly, the pattern stops looking chaotic and starts looking almost rational. A wave of criticism isn't a failure of the strategy. The criticism is the strategy. The clicks, the arguments, the defenses, the attacks, all of it feeds the same machine. That's my read, marked plainly as my read. But once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Here's where the story stops being about where anyone is sleeping and starts being about something a lot of people clocked the instant the news broke. The announcement landed during Royal Ascot, and that timing caught the eye immediately. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had just returned to that famous meeting with cameras tracking her every move. Her vivid yellow outfit became one of the single biggest talking points of the day, blazing out of every photograph, making her impossible to overlook as she rode through the carriage procession. She stood out in that bright yellow magnificently, so that everyone lining the route could catch a glimpse of her. Cleverly chosen, too, and probably to the quiet irritation of the Ascot organizers, because a deep red, a tomato red, was reportedly meant to be the color of the moment at Ascot that year. She didn't get that memo, or she ignored it. She wore a striking yellow that ensured every single person at Ascot saw her sail past in the procession. It followed what many read as a real high for the family. It came not long after trooping the color, where Catherine, the Princess of Wales, drew enormous public warmth during the ceremony. And then, right in the swell of that positive coverage, headlines about the couple's reported return suddenly muscled into the conversation and yanked a chunk of the spotlight sideways. That's exactly why the timing feels so strategic to so many people. If Ascot is struggling to generate its own heat, what faster way to reignite public fascination than a return to Britain wrapped in royal headlines, reunion rumors, speculation about King Charles, the cameras of the Invictus Games, security drama, and Meghan back on British soil for the first time in years. This isn't merely a trip. This is a publicity machine roaring to life. If you followed this family for any length of time, you have almost certainly clocked a pattern that royal watchers discuss constantly. Again and again, a major headline about the Prince and Princess of Wales is swiftly chased by a headline about the Sussexes, dragging at least some of the public gaze with it. People point to the Platinum Jubilee, to the funeral period, and now to Royal Ascot as examples of that overlap. It's striking that whenever we see a wave of warm coverage around Prince William and Catherine, along comes a spotlight-stealing announcement that the couple will be flying over. It is, to some eyes, almost wearily predictable. Different year, same move. So instead of asking whether it's pure coincidence, a lot of people are asking about the timing itself. Who decided this was the right day to drop the announcement? Did it come from Prince Harry's team, or was it shaped by someone else entirely? Those questions have become part of the wider debate. Who sanctioned that timing? If it came from the Sussex side, then it's the same old script. Control the narrative, do it again, do it loudly. If that timing was deliberate, as some commentators clearly suspect, it would fit a communication strategy built on steering the public conversation and keeping the story wedged firmly in the headlines. Whether that's truly what happened stays a matter of speculation. But it's one of the questions people keep chewing over. Either way, the attention lurched, and a great many people ended up discussing this announcement instead of the other moments from Royal Ascot. But there's a far more important issue tangled up in this trip, and it has very little to do with the racing and everything to do with the people a certain event is actually meant to honor. Because the real asset here, the real currency, the thing that makes people click and argue and defend and attack and watch is the royal connection itself. That is the gold. This entire visit is reportedly built around the Invictus Games and the run-up to the next edition of those games heading to Birmingham, an event Prince Harry created to lift up wounded and injured servicemen and women who have found fresh purpose and fierce determination through sport. That is the mission burning at the center of it. But here's the uncomfortable question that keeps surfacing whenever headlines about this couple swallow the news cycle. Who ends up with the most attention? Does the focus actually stay on the competitors and the veterans the Invictus Games exist to celebrate? What the Birmingham Games are getting effectively is a celebrity opening a launch, and you might assume Meghan will turn up. I'm not so sure. There are a few problems that would make her return genuinely awkward, not least that I don't believe she would want to be housed in a royal residence, which becomes another cost again. The one thing that might swing her around is the publicity, nothing else. That's the worry critics keep raising. They argue that rather than the spotlight staying on the veterans and their achievements, the coverage tilts heavily toward Prince Harry and Meghan. And so, an event built to honor wounded service personnel risks being smothered by royal headlines. The people who ought to be receiving the most attention are the competitors rebuilding their lives through sport, yet the cameras so often chase the highest-profile guests in the room instead. You can't ignore that coming back on the back of Invictus also overshadows the real men and women actually competing in it. It risks becoming a public relations vehicle for Prince Harry and Meghan, a return ticket, and suddenly the Invictus Games themselves are eclipsed by the couple's drama. The headline people would hope to read is something like, "Birmingham prepares to honor its heroes." Instead, the biggest discussions swirl around questions like, will Meghan even attend? Critics argue that this shoves the athletes and veterans, the entire reason the event exists, further into the background of the coverage. There's another recurring theme, too, the cost of high-profile visits. People ask about travel, about accommodation, about the security around prominent guests who aren't themselves competing. Some members of the public have called for more transparency on event spending, saying they want a clearer view of how funds are allocated and how resources are handled, all while keeping the focus on the veterans the Invictus Games were built to serve. I won't throw out a figure I can't stand behind, but one observation is fair. There was reporting of an eye-wateringly expensive shirt worn in one of Meghan's recent lifestyle posts, the kind of garment that jars badly when set against images of people who have survived terrible violence. To many eyes, that reads as tone-deaf. And when a loyal audience that fiercely supports the armed forces starts asking how money is being spent, those questions tend to grow out of ongoing public conversation rather than materializing from nowhere. For some critics, the fear is simple. The attention drifts away from the veterans the event was created to support and toward the most famous faces attending. So for a lot of observers, this is no longer purely about royal family dynamics. It's about keeping the charity's mission front and center and making sure the spotlight stays locked on the people the Invictus Games were designed to honor. Once again, we are watching Prince Harry and Meghan scramble to re-establish their credentials, to prove they are royal, and to do it, Meghan will probably have to climb onto that plane through gritted teeth. It'll be genuinely interesting to gauge the public's reaction if they do appear together at any public-facing event, which carries us to one of the biggest unanswered questions in the entire story. For all the excitement in some reports hinting the whole family could make the trip, there's still a thick fog of uncertainty over who will actually travel. One very live possibility discussed by plenty of commentators is that Meghan may ultimately decide not to go at all. Nothing has been officially confirmed. Similar speculation has shadowed previous royal visits, which is exactly why so many people are waiting to see what genuinely happens rather than what is briefed. This is the will they, won't they game that frankly almost makes me ill that we have to keep playing. Will they, won't they come for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee? Will they, won't they bring the children to Queen Elizabeth's funeral? It has, time and again, looked like an opportunity seized for media attention. Almost every major royal event seems to summon the same wave of questions. Are they coming? Will the children be there? When will a final decision actually be announced? And the speculation so often runs right up to the last possible moment before the public gets a clear answer. What makes this latest chapter even murkier is that only days before the headlines claiming the whole family was expected, another report, including one from an outlet often seen as warm toward the couple, suggested they were not expected to be there at all. So inside a single week, the reporting pointed in flatly opposite directions. One said everything was steaming ahead. The other cast heavy doubt on the whole plan. That kind of split reporting doesn't look like a settled situation. It looks like the details are still genuinely up in the air, or like different sources are telling very different stories. And that drags us to the difficult corner Meghan now finds herself in. People are going to ask hard questions. Is this truly about family? Is this truly about the children? Is it truly about Invictus? Or is it also about reminding the world that Meghan is still royal adjacent at the precise moment her lifestyle brand is hungry for relevance? The possible trip has been framed in part around the children and the tender prospect of King Charles's grandchildren being back on British soil. And yet, Prince Harry and Meghan have spent years keeping their children almost entirely out of public view, sharing very little, guarding their exposure fiercely. So that raises an obvious tension. If the children become a major part of the public story around this visit, how does that square with the couple's long-standing insistence on protecting their privacy? And if the plan really is to keep the children fully out of sight, then why make them such a central beat of the announcement in the first place? That's one of the contradictions a lot of people keep pointing straight at. Think about it. Was there ever a more natural moment for the children to quietly meet and play with their cousins in private than during a family visit? They could have done it gently, away from cameras. Instead, nothing of the sort, because the children weren't there. Because of all this, some commentators believe Meghan may, in the end, choose not to attend. Others think there could be a last-minute change of plan for any number of reasons: scheduling, personal circumstances, practical considerations. At this stage, it's all still speculation. I would be sincerely surprised if Meghan did anything beyond Invictus itself, because she'll say she wants to stay with the children. And I do think she risks being booed if she pushes herself too far into the public eye in Britain. If it weren't so unprofessional, I might almost be tempted to be one of the voices in that crowd, urging honesty about what's really going on. Reported objectively, not subjectively. And so, the will they, won't they conversation grinds on. Whether the trip actually happens or not, the speculation alone can keep this story alive in the headlines for weeks. Which is precisely why the next developments matter far more than the first announcement. The real test is whether the reported plans are actually carried through, because that is so often where the biggest questions finally get answered. Let me put you inside the story for a second, because a thought experiment cuts through this faster than any analysis. Imagine you genuinely believed a country was too dangerous for your children, truly believed it in your gut, the way you believe a hot stove will burn them. Would a borrowed bedroom change your mind? Would a warmer headline? Of course not. Nothing about the danger would have moved, so nothing about your decision would move either. The only thing that flips a calculation like that is when the original fear was never really the deciding factor in the first place. That's the quiet tell. When the stated reason can be dissolved by a guest suite and a press cycle, the stated reason was probably never the real reason. That isn't me putting words in anyone's mouth. That's just what the behavior set against the unchanged facts appears to suggest. Now let's return to the question I planted at the very beginning. For years, security concerns were sold as the central reason this family did not come home to Britain. Yet now, reports suggest a visit could happen, even though there has been no publicly confirmed change to the official security arrangement since the court case. That is the contrast sitting at the dead center of this whole debate. And it is exactly why so many people are asking what, if anything, has truly changed. Here's my answer, the one I promised you, and the one you won't find trending across your feed. Nothing about the security changed, because security was never really the lock on the door. It was the story told about the lock. The arrangement today is what it was before the court case, before the appeal, before the spring of 2025. What actually changed is need. The need for relevance. The need for royal sparkle around a fading brand. The need for a connection to Britain at the precise moment the Invictus Games approach and the cameras swing back into position. Let me hand you one more lens, because I think it makes everything click. Think of a struggling business with a single famous product it can no longer manufacture. It cannot make the product anymore, the royal duties, the working title, the daily relevance. So what does a business like that do? It trades on the brand. It licenses the name. It stages an appearance. It reminds the market it still exists. Strip away the palace and the protocol, and that is the maneuver you are watching. A brand returning to its richest market to remind everyone the logo still means something. Meghan struggles to assimilate. By many accounts, she never wanted to slot quietly beneath the hierarchy and serve, and that is simply not compatible with life inside this family. And that, in the end, is the whole contrast. Compare her with Catherine, the Princess of Wales, the figure so many regard as the great asset of this institution, the one widely seen as the favorite, beloved precisely because there are no airs about her, because she is content to take her place beneath King Charles and be dutiful day after day after day. That was the one thing Meghan could never get her head around. She had the world at her feet, and she was the one who broke it. So when you see a headline this week shouting that Prince Harry has won his family's safety, pause. Hold it up against the public record. Remember the courtroom. Remember the appeal. Remember who actually holds the power and who does not. The headlines tell you one story. The facts, read slowly, tell you a very different one. That is the loop I opened, and now it is closed. The protection did not move. The need did. Everything else is staging. Make of all that exactly what you will, and then decide for yourself what the evidence really suggests, because that is the only verdict that matters. If you want to keep going behind the palace gates with me, there are 2 more videos waiting on your screen right now, and one of them digs straight into what happens next, and whether Meghan ever actually boards that plane. Go and watch, and I'll see you there.